Welcome in, everyone. Thank you for listening to the 81st ever episode of the Missouri Sports Podcast, brought to you by 106 Apparel and recording from the Revel Advertising Studio in beautiful Springfield, Missouri. I'm one of your hosts, Cameron Albert, alongside my friend and fellow Mizzou fan, Kyle DeVries. How are you doing today, Kyle?
I'm doing great, Cameron. Pretty interesting circumstances we have here. We thought last week was weird. It has gotten weirder.
Yes.
But I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Last week, was that just a week? Basically a week ago that we recorded with producer Cameron just sitting right outside the room.
Yeah, feels like an eternity. Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to my wife about that, and like today's Friday. Yesterday was Thursday, obviously. A week ago yesterday, the NCAA tournament was canceled, and that feels like a month ago.
Yeah, the games were supposed to start yesterday, and so that was very sad.
Yes.
I don't know that was supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
But it's been a weird couple of weeks. I sent out a tweet to our followers, just kind of wanting to get a grasp on who's still working and how has this whole situation affected your job or your hours, and if you're not working, what are you doing? And so it got a pretty mixed bag results. Some people said they were quarantining and were watching a lot of Netflix, and others said they were working normal hours, and some were working weird hours. So it was really kind of all over the board, but it was kind of cool to hear from some of you guys. And sometimes it's I just forget that all you guys are just normal people out there, and everybody has a role in society, and a lot of you guys have really cool jobs and important jobs. So that was really cool to hear from everybody.
Yeah, and it was just kind of cool to see a different, I don't know, something different. I mean, we get so caught up in what we're doing every day, and we just, the world starts to just revolve around our schedules and stuff. And I don't know, there's just a lot of people out there that are going through all sorts of different things with their jobs, with their families and everything. So,
yeah.
Yep. Producer Cameron sent me a note that I actually said, I think I said we were recording from the Revel Advertising Studio, which we're obviously not. I'm at my house. Shout out to my wife for putting together this nice area for me to record, complete with shrubbery.
Nice.
I got our guys behind us there, Konzo, looking over me. So
nice.
I mean,
Well, I have this poster of Mizzou football behind me that was already there because I'm a big Mizzou fan. So
yeah, I'll be honest.
He's also watching over you.
Yes. Oh, Drew Locke. Hello, Drew.
Thank
welcome
you,
in, of course.
Thank you, Drew, for being here.
Yeah, it's really good to have you here, and I mean, couldn't ask for more, really. I have a lot of Mizzou posters, but unfortunately, I've been told we don't have a great place to put them in the house as far as display. So.
By the interior designer.
Yeah, maybe one day we'll be able to. I'll have a space for them all.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who are listening audio only, which I'm assuming is a decent chunk of you guys, we obviously have decided to err on the side of caution and not meet up in person this week. So we are not at the Revel Advertising Studio. We are at our homes, and we are recording via Skype call. I'm wearing my Xbox headset to record this podcast. So pretty janky little setup, but I think we'll be able to make it work for the foreseeable future.
I don't think it's janky at all. I think I would call it, frankly, an epic gamer moment because I've got my gaming headset on as well. And
yeah, I'm honestly proud of us.
We'll probably start bringing them to the studio and just using them because it's working really well so far.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, if you notice a little dip in quality, bear with us. We're trying something new. Well, you ready to talk about Mizzou happenings?
I'm ready. Seems kind of weird that we actually have news that's happened, but there really has been some stuff going on. But there's been a decent amount of football and basketball recruiting still kind of going on because coaches can still communicate with people. They obviously can't meet up, but can still have communication. And so one thing I wanted to talk about was a new football commit that we got recently, and that is Daniel Hawthorne. He is a long snapper who is from Louisiana, and he was previously committed to LSU and then flipped over to Mizzou. So plucked him from the home state,
From the
which is
national champions.
from the defending national champions. So that is definitely something to be proud of. Mizzou's special teams um, haven't been great in the last couple of years, um, and so having a staple guy that we can rely on there is gonna be really important, and that'll be so nice to not have to worry about the punt, the punt going over the punter's head and stuff like that, which is all things we have seen and would like to not see anymore. So, Daniel, welcome to Mizzou. We're happy to have you on board. Looking forward to seeing you in a Mizzou uniform. Also, he has done some recruiting for some other players in the class, so obviously that's great to see. He's a great Twitter follower. Twitter follow if you haven't done that already. I'll give him a little plug right here. Let's see if I can find his Twitter handle.
And a listener of ours, we found out. So
yeah,
maybe if we play our cards right, we could get him to maybe do an interview or something sometime.
Yeah, that sounds great. His Twitter handle is dhawthorne01 on Twitter. So go ahead and give him a follow. That'll be great for you guys to follow along with, because he is tweeting other recruits and showing a lot of support for Mizzou. So it's obviously great to see.
Yeah, you mentioned the special teams struggles in recent years, and it's just like definitely a place where you just can't afford huge mistakes. And I don't know, just shoring up that and maybe a little change of direction with the new coaching staff. I am looking forward to hopefully improvements next season.
For sure. I guess switching over to basketball, there's been a little bit of recruiting news, which has been a little sparse over the last few months. So it's been good to get a little bit of news on that front. It's now that time of year where Mizzou is going to be looking for, or really any school is going to be looking for, some spring additions, whether that be grad transfers or just normal transfers that may have to sit out a year. But a grad transfer that Mizzou has come into contact with is Amari Hardy from UNLV, and he would be a grad transfer, so he would be immediately eligible. He averaged 15 points per game last year, so obviously there's pretty high demand for him. So who knows if he'll end up at Mizzou or not? But definitely, I think every school in the country is probably looking to find a guard who can score for sure.
Yeah, he played 84% of minutes for UNLV this past season. Looks like kind of a combo guard. 33% from three on 189 attempts, and gets to the free throw line, high assist rate, low turnover rate. So definitely all sorts of things that we're looking for Mizzou. And he's originally from Detroit, Michigan. So we know that Mizzou coaching staff has ties there, so maybe they can rely on that a little bit. And as far as I know, as far as I've seen anyway, that's the only transfer of any kind that Mizzou has been attached to in the news. There may have been one other one, but looking through tweets and stuff, that's the only one I can find. There have been some big name transfers. I wanted to know what you thought about basically the entire, just about the entire Wichita State team. Yeah, transferring.
Yeah, it's bizarre. They weren't great this year. They were decent. I think they had a shot at the NCAA tournament. They were probably on the bubble, maybe on the wrong side of the bubble. But it's interesting to see a mass exodus from a team that's not terrible, or a team that's really, really good. Might have some guys that aren't getting much playing time that want to leave. I know nothing about any of these players or the situation at all, but I know Greg Marshall is an intense coach. He's a great coach, but he's very intense, and I could see there being some dissonance between that style of coach and players. So I don't know if there was some internal stuff going on. I have no idea, but definitely I think there's like at least 6 or 7 guys that are transferring from Wichita State, which is obviously like half the roster.
Yeah, and with a situation like that, and this is, I don't know, I'm kind of speaking on something I don't really know that much about, but I could see just, with relationships and personalities, if you have a coach like that, I could see that maybe snowballing, if if just several players kind of are on the same page and that's not the same page as the head coach, then I could see it kind of snowballing. And you compare it to other coaches and, you hear about, well, just to compare it to Konzo, I think, there's an alternate universe where when Mario McKinney transferred, then, that could snowball. And obviously, we just entered the off season, a lot can happen. But, if that kind of spread around the entire freshman class or something, kind of like it did under Kim Anderson, where just the players just are not on the same page with the head coach, and you see, entire recruiting classes just leave, and that seems like kind of what the deal is at Wichita State.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I mean, there might have been some kind of incident. Obviously, again, this is speculation, but there could have been some kind of incident where, maybe a coach and a player got into it and a lot of the players were on the other player's side, and, it could be a million different things, but there's so many relational type things that go on behind closed doors that fans never know about or see, or anything like that. So it might just be a lot of guys looking to make a move for nothing relational. I don't know.
Yeah.
It could be anything, but
It could be all separate basketball reasons.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the new offers that Mizzou sent out?
Yeah,
Basketball?
a couple new offers that came out late last night, actually. The first one was Taurus Reed Jr. He's the big man at Chaminade. He's a 2022 recruit. The other one is Aiden Shaw, who is a four-star small forward from Blue Valley, Kansas. So it looks like Konzo and company are getting a early start on the 2022 guys. Every class is big, but a lot of local guys. And I think that there are potentially other guys in that class that are local that could end up getting a look from Mizzou as well. But those are definitely two notable guys for sure that we'll be talking about for a long time.
Yeah, it seems like a long ways away, but every recruiting class started at this point, so
For sure.
these are the names to keep an eye on, and man, it's a long journey ahead, but it just it's a cycle. You talk about it as a recruiting cycle, and starting a new one with 2022 guys. The last domino in the 2020 recruiting cycle for more than just Missouri is Josh Christopher. And perhaps maybe he might be announcing his decision this weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not really sure what's going to happen there. He posted something kind of cryptic on Twitter that the coronavirus stuff was kind of like destroying the hype a little bit or something
Putting a little
like that.
damper on it, yeah.
Yeah, so he might just go ahead and announce this weekend. I'm not sure what is going to happen. He might just drop his announcement at any time, or maybe he'll end up waiting till April like he originally planned. I don't know.
Yeah, but we still the general consensus is that Michigan is probably the team to beat still.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he's all done with his visits and everything. Every indication that he makes is that he still doesn't know. If he's prepared to make a decision to announce his decision this weekend, then obviously that's not true.
Yep.
And that's just part of recruiting, though.
Mm-hmm.
Any other news items you want to bring out?
I think that's all the news I had for now. I'm sure there's more out there that we forget because that seems to always happen. But I think that's most of the main football and basketball stuff going on right now.
I would agree. The main topic of this episode is going to be just a season recap for the basketball team. And I guess let's kick it off. I'll kick it off with talking about our preview episode, which was episode 62. We previewed the season, went game by game on the schedule, and we didn't reconcile our picks like across the SEC. We didn't pick every SEC game. We just picked Mizzou's schedule, and we knew that we were going to do more research on these teams as they actually came up on the schedule. So this was just kind of a rough idea of what we thought the season might look like. Kyle, you predicted a 19-12 record, 9-9 in conference play. I had them one win better, 20-11, but also 9-9 in conference play. And Missouri, in reality, was 15-16. 7-11 in conference play. Do you think that our predictions are justified based on injuries, or do you think we were still a little high on them even if everybody was healthy?
I think we were a little bit high on them. And obviously we'll get into all the details of what happened with this season in a little bit, but I still think that even though we had some injuries that allowed guys to kind of step up into new roles and stuff like that, I'm not sure that a healthy Mark Smith means 5 extra wins. Or I guess Tillman was injured too, but
maybe 2 in conference play though. We were only 2 games off with our predictions in conference play.
But I also, I guess, think that if Mark Smith and Jeremiah Tillman are healthy the whole season, Xavier Penson probably doesn't have the outbreak that he ended up having, which ended up being probably the most positive thing of the entire season, at least one of the most positive stories of the season.
Yeah, I would say so. Obviously, we know that Missouri finished 10th in the SEC. That was due in large part to a tiebreaker with Arkansas. Arkansas was also 7-11, but Mizzou, having beaten Auburn, pushed them over the top to get the 10th spot. So they had a bye in the SEC tournament that did not happen.
Yeah, it's fascinating to. I guess we'll never know what would have happened in that third matchup with A&M. Would have been really great to get another shot at beating them for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine Missouri losing to them 3 times in one season, but as I say that, it pops into my head that in 2012, Missouri beat Baylor, who was like a top 10 team all season, beat Baylor 3 times, home and away, and then again in the Big 12 tournament championship.
Yep. Yeah, really didn't have much trouble with Baylor at all, and they were like a top 10 team all year. So bizarre.
Maybe A&M's the same way, but with like 100-ish KenPom teams.
Yeah, sometimes it's just it's matchup based, and if you think about Mizzou's team that year, I don't remember a whole lot specifically about Baylor's team, but I kind of feel like Mizzou was just a little bit better version of kind of what Baylor had. And if you think about the bad matchups for Mizzou that year was Kansas State. Kansas State had a lot of really strong post players that just kind of overpowered us, and we ended up losing to Kansas State both times we played them in the regular season that year. So, and Kansas State was like a totally average team, like middle of the road, Big 12 team. So, so much goes into just matchups that you run into.
Matchups and play style, yeah. Mm-hmm. Missouri finished the season 97th in KenPom, 150th on offense, 71st on defense. In SEC play, they were 12th on offense and 9th on defense. That 9th on defense was helped out a lot by the final game against Alabama, where they just clamped down on a team that had been one of the very best offenses in the SEC and pretty high up in the national rankings as well.
Yeah, they had them like 30 or 40 points under their like season average for points scored. That was unbelievable. Definitely, there were a few encouraging things that happened this season. Obviously, we named one, and that was Xavier Penson. But I do think that we kind of were trending upward as the season came to a close. Seems like we played some of our best basketball the last 25 to 30% of the season, probably.
Yeah, I would agree. Looking back at our predictions a little bit, I want to just mention a few things that we actually said in that preview episode. Kyle, you were talking about what you thought the floor was for this team this year, and you said, quote, it's possible they finish 12th or 13th in the SEC. Maybe they have an injury. They dealt with that last year with Mark Smith and Pickett towards the end of the year. Maybe Tillman goes down. Obviously I don't want to think about that. And you said a healthy floor would be about 11th in the SEC. And I think they kind of outplayed those expectations a little bit because they were not healthy and still finished 10th. But, I mean, for all purposes, 11th was basically the same thing record-wise. So I thought that was interesting that you specifically mentioned maybe Tillman goes down. Obviously I don't want to think about that. And then he missed a considerable amount of time.
Yeah. I do have to say that it probably wasn't as terrible as we probably thought it could be before the season. Unfortunately, Tillman probably just wasn't as effective as we expected him to be coming into the year. So his injury wasn't quite as devastating, but definitely didn't help either.
Yeah, I would agree. And you said the ceiling for this team was maybe third or fourth in the SEC. And you said maybe like something like 11 wins. And if they had gotten 11 wins, they would have been tied for fourth. So you were pretty right on there. And um, again, maybe that was a little bit of overconfidence based on early analytics and some things like that. But that wasn't far off. Them still winning 7 games isn't far off from a ceiling of 11 wins.
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy at all at that point in time for us to think that Missouri could have done that well. I think they started off as like a top 15 team on Bart Torvik,
Yeah.
that predictive metric, which obviously we thought what might have been a little bit ridiculous, but there was reason to believe that could happen, that Missouri could have a really, really solid season. And I think some of those same reasons are why, the same thing could happen next year. I think that Missouri could, be top 25 in some of those predictive metrics, assuming we hang on to the core of this team.
Yeah, I agree with you there. When I was talking about in the preview episode, when I was talking about, what could go wrong, I said, quote, them losing a non-conference game where they're favored at home should be considered a red flag, and maybe they're looking at closer to a season like last year with 15 wins than the 20 we think they're capable of. And obviously the game that jumps out is Charleston Southern. And we said as soon as that game went final, you knew that's the type of game that keeps you out of the NCAA tournament, and that is obviously a red flag and makes it look like a team that's going to win 15 games, and that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, and I guess I'll let you get back to what you were saying here in a second, but I guess just a quick note on what that makes me think of is just the highs and lows that we went through this season. That being one of the lowest of lows of any season I can possibly think of. I mean, even I think that we talked about that being statistically a worse loss than any loss that we had in the Kim Anderson era, which is just mind blowing to think that happened this year, considering we had wins over Florida and Auburn, and just that the valleys and the peaks the range was just immense.
Yeah, and I actually saw, I think Rock M Nation was tweeting it out or something, that there was an analytic metric that was showing it was comparing different teams, and it was showing their consistency and like it was basically 4 quadrants, and it had consistently good, consistently bad, inconsistently good, and inconsistently bad. And Mizzou was like all the way in the top corner of inconsistently good. And basically it showed that they could play with just about anybody, and but they were just so inconsistent that they would drop games like Charleston Southern.
Yeah, that definitely sums up how it felt as a fan just following along for the ride as well. It's just all over the place.
Yeah.
It's like we kind of started to pick up on on them being unpredictable, to the fact where it's like I remember before the Auburn game, I wasn't going to be surprised if they somehow found a way to win. It was just like, I'm prepared for anything to happen in any game.
Yeah, let me get back to that Auburn game in just a sec. But a few of the games that we picked that I thought I would make note of was I picked them to lose against Xavier, and you picked them to win. Obviously, we both picked them to win against Charleston Southern, but in the preseason tournament, I had them winning that, and that was looking at both of our schedules here, that was the most foolish prediction, I would say, that I can find on here. You were a little bit more accurate. I mean, obviously they lost both games in reality. You had them losing the first game and winning the second one against Stanford. And then we both picked losses against Florida. We both picked wins in the second game of the SEC season against Tennessee. We both picked wins in both the A&M games. I, for some reason, picked a win against Auburn. I honestly can't tell you why I did that. But then we both finished the season 6-0, predicting all of those games correctly.
Wow.
So a lot of the season went kind of like we expected.
Hmm.
Obviously, the preseason tournaments are really hard to predict. Charleston Southern, nobody was going to ever predict that. And then I would basically say the same about Florida. And for some reason, I picked them to beat Auburn. I don't really know why.
Yeah. Um, the Tennessee game is obviously one we both predicted to win preseason, and that's a game Missouri probably should have won. Tennessee was probably worse than we thought they were going to be before the season started, so that ended up looking like pretty good prediction um, at the time of that game. But just it was a game they didn't win that I think they should have at home.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. And then also the home game against Texas A&M was
Yeah.
one that we both had that down as a win. I mean, that was I think it may have ended up as Missouri's only quadrant 3 loss. I'd have to double check that, but I think that's the case. Obviously, they had a quadrant 4 loss against Charleston Southern, which is inexcusable. But then they were just 2 winnable games away from being undefeated in quadrant 3 and 4, which would have helped a resume situation if that had been necessary.
Hmm.
Um, let's see here. Before we kind of go down and talk about the roster a little bit, I want to mention looking back at our 3-on-3 teams that we picked in the preseason during that preview episode. Um, that's something that we've done twice now, is just kind of had a little fun playing, picking a 3-on-3 team as if they were going to play like NBA Street type basketball, basically, or NBA Jam, if you want that. My team was all Smiths: Drew Smith, Mark Smith, Mitchell Smith. Kyle, your team was Jeremiah Tillman, who you got with the first overall pick, Xavier Pinson, and Javon Pickett. I just thought we could look at that and see, that's kind of a reflection of how we thought these players would play this year. And if there's
Hmm.
anything that kind of changed or if we would choose anything differently. Obviously, I tried to have a little fun with it and pick all the Smiths. But looking back on it, outside of Mark Smith's injury, I'm really happy with my squad.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Drew Smith was probably, you said that was your first pick.
Yeah.
Um, I think if we did this tournament, after the season was over, or did this fantasy draft or
Yeah.
whatever, um, I would say Drew Smith and Xavier Pinson would have gone 1-2, and that ended up kind of being, neither one of us had both those guys, so
Right.
it was definitely pretty even in that way looking back. I think that I knew Xavier Pinson was gonna kind of have a good season. I think that I knew that he would improve, but I definitely did not see that kind of production that he had in the second half of the season coming. That was beyond my expectations, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, um, unless you have anything else you want to say about the 3-on-3, Mitchell Smith was a pleasant surprise, but let's just kind of work our way into just talking about the individual players that we want to kind of spotlight. We've mentioned Xavier Pinson a couple times now. Obviously, the SEC season that he had, and it wasn't even the full SEC season. It was basically the last half of it where he just got a ton of minutes and um, basically Missouri was running 2 point guards with him and Drew Smith as much as possible, and he was getting to the basket, getting fouled, making threes, basically just doing everything you want. He was distributing everything you want out of a scoring guard, and helped Missouri. I think they're probably the record's probably 2 wins better than they would have been if he was just on the bench, kind of playing the way he had the rest of the season.
Yeah, he was definitely in attack mode like 100% of the time in some of those games in the second half of the season. And there was that one stretch with like 4 or 5 games where he seriously averaged like 25 points a game or something. It was just unreal, some of the production that he was putting together. And yeah, I think it was really that first game against Arkansas that I think it was kind of his breakout point for sure.
Yeah, that Arkansas game, he had 24 points. He played 41 minutes in that, obviously, overtime game. 41 minutes, he had 24 points, and then 2 games later, 28 against Auburn, and then 32 against Ole Miss. He was KenPom MVP in all 3 of those games. 2 of them, he was at the free throw line um, more than 10 times. He was making threes in the Ole Miss game. He was 4 for 4 from three, and obviously offensive rating off the charts during that stretch. And you just see the minutes uptick. I mean, starting with that Arkansas game, he played just 20 minutes against Vanderbilt, but we didn't really need him much. And then the next lowest is 27, where up until that point he had hit 27 minutes one time in like the first 20 games of the season or so.
Yeah, he definitely the production of in the last 20-30% of the season for sure was probably more productive than I thought that he might be at any point in his career at Missouri, and I knew that he had a high ceiling. So that's
Yeah.
definitely saying something. And I think that it was impressive that he was able to do it with some consistency for sure. It wasn't just one game here and there. It was definitely just at one point when he realized, okay, this is my role now that certain players are out with injuries. I'm capable of this. This is how I'm gonna play from here on out. And I think that's what he did.
Yeah, I mean, he just looked so confident. I think that was the main thing that I saw, was just his confidence was off the charts. As we go through the roster here a little bit, let's touch on a few players that we won't have to spend too much time talking about. But I did want to mention Mario McKinney. Um, so far, um, one of the few transfers that has occurred under Conzo Martin. Um, it seems like about one a year we've been experiencing since he took over, which is quite a bit better than what we were seeing under Kim Anderson. But when you have a guy that we were following since his freshman year in high school, Missouri kid, St. Louis kid, makes the decision to play for the home state team, and then for it to not work out, it's obviously disappointing. And you never know what goes on behind the scenes. We talked about that a little bit earlier with Wichita State, but I still, looking back on it now that decision or that announcement is a few months behind us, I'm just kind of disappointed that they weren't able to make it work, and that we weren't going to see him flourish in any kind of role at Missouri.
Yeah, you're right. Especially with everything you said. I mean, just that how long we followed him in high school and being the home state kid, you definitely is a guy you root for, maybe more so than the typical recruit. So it is disappointing. But again, kind of like we talked about with Wichita State and Greg Marshall earlier, sometimes there's just dissonance in between personalities, and I think that after in retrospect, looking back at this situation, it's pretty easy to see where Mario McKinney and Conzo Barton might have personality dissonance, and sometimes it's just not going to work out, and maybe the expectation is a lot different than reality, and I think that was probably the case here.
Yeah, I remember I went to the Chicago State game in Columbia, and that was a blowout, and he got into the game fairly early in the second half, and the crowd basically gave him a standing ovation just for getting subbed into the game.
Mhm.
And I was with my dad and my 2 little brothers, and I said to my dad, I feel like the crowd, obviously they knew who he was, and knew that it honestly seemed like the crowd knew that he probably needed some extra cheers because he wasn't playing as much as maybe he thought. And that may be me looking into it a little bit too much, but the crowd cheered for a freshman getting minutes more than I would expect, basically. And he showed off his athleticism in that game, and the fans were just really showing him some love. And that should have been a thing that we saw, you know, a dozen times next year, and then 20 times a piece for the 2 seasons after that, when he was an upperclassman and kind of finding his role. But Now he's at Logan, something like Logan College in Illinois, and is probably going to play there the entire next season, and then try to come back to Division One the season after that.
Yep, definitely a name that Missouri fans recognize from his uncle. What would be the relation here?
I think it was cousin.
Cousin, yeah, you're right. You're right. Definitely a last name that is recognizable to Missouri fans. Mario, a guy who's super athletic, probably just needed to work on his well-rounded game. Some of the other aspects of the game just probably weren't quite there yet to get the playing time he probably thought he deserved. But I think that he's capable of bettering some of those other skills that he needs to work on, and maybe he'll make a good return to a D1 program.
Yeah, I'll definitely be rooting for him wherever he goes, unless it's like the unthinkable. But we won't talk about that.
I don't think so.
Let's talk about briefly Axel Okongo. Still kind of a head scratcher for me. Like, obviously, I mean, no respect to him as a basketball player, as a person, anything.
No respect.
I mean, no disrespect to him. It just seems like a weird fit. I mean, yeah. I just don't quite understand. And also, Konzo talked about trying to get him a second year of eligibility. I don't know whatever came of that.
They got it.
They did. Sure. Okay. So
that was before the season started. I'm pretty sure they got him a second year of eligibility. They really made that like a point of emphasis to do that. So, and obviously we had never seen him play before at that point. So it's like, okay, great. If Konzo's on board with this, then so am I. At least that's how I felt.
Yeah.
But just everything about his recruitment. I mean, there really wasn't any recruitment that was public knowledge. I mean, it was just all of a sudden he was committed, and I was like, okay, who's this dude? But again, we just kind of trusted that there was a legitimate role for him that he was going to be filling from the get-go. That never happened. We saw him at kind of the open practice before the season started, and we're definitely not college basketball scouts in any way, but it was not. It was very apparent that he was not ready to make a difference in really any way this season, and I agree. It just doesn't make sense to me why he was added to the team, and especially why they fought for that second year of eligibility. I really don't know.
Yeah, and it would make more sense to me if he was like if he was a freshman and this was going to be his redshirt freshman year, and he had so much time to develop, but we don't have that at all. He's got this off season and then one more year of eligibility, and just that part of it to me is maybe what makes the least sense. He actually saw some meaningful minutes against Texas A&M and West Virginia, I believe.
I think his first career minutes were at Kentucky.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think he was on the floor like at the same time as Mario McKinney for his like first minutes. And Mario, obviously, we talked about his playing time issues. So this was two guys that we had not seen much of, and they were thrown out there in the first SEC game of the season. So
yeah.
Was
that Mario's last Mizzou game?
I don't know. I'd have to look. I can probably find that out.
Yeah,
In the meantime, I'm going to worry a lot about it. In the meantime, you want to talk about Parker Brown, a guy who kind of, at least for me, surprised me with how ready, kind of flip side of Okongo, he seemed more ready to contribute than I was expecting.
Yeah, Parker Brown's a guy that chose Mizzou over some pretty decent options. Whenever he came to Mizzou, he redshirted his freshman year. He didn't play much at the beginning of the year, but we'd heard a lot about his potential and his athleticism. And then he kind of started to get some playing time in the SEC portion of the season. And honestly, I'm not sure we beat Ole Miss at home without Parker Brown. He really had a strong game, points, rebounds, assists. He's kind of doing it all, and he definitely showed those flashes of athleticism whenever he was playing. So, and his playing time was a bit of a mystery. I thought he was a guy that could have played more and deserved maybe a little bit more playing time, especially at a position where we didn't really have solid production all year. So. And there's definitely been some rumors going around, about what his future might look like. I don't, I don't love to speculate on, on individuals, but if he decides to transfer out of Missouri, it probably wouldn't shock me. It's just common sense. He's a guy who's talented and knows he's talented and didn't get as much playing time as he probably thinks he should get, and probably didn't get as much playing time as his family thinks he should get. So, but at this point, he's still on the roster. So I hope that he stays. I think he could turn out being a pretty good player.
Yeah, you talk about that Ole Miss game. He played 24 minutes in that game, and his season high outside of that game was 11 against Morehead State. And he had 6 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists. So, like I said, kind of filling it up. And it seemed like Konzo would insert him into the lineup when teams were pressing, and they kind of used him as a press break outlet. And that resulted in a few dunks, including one technical foul for hanging on the rim, which was questionable, but yeah, he probably hung on there a little bit too long.
Yeah, he had some pretty big plays against Auburn, wasn't it? That
Yeah,
he had
Auburn,
like
yeah.
two big dunks.
Yep.
Obviously in a huge game.
Yeah. Let's stick with the freshman class and move on to Trey Jackson. We'll just keep with the theme of players that there are playing time questions. Maybe there's definitely sections of the fan base that think Trey Jackson should have played a lot more than he did. And at times I would consider myself one of those people, but again, maybe I do this to a fault, but I kind of lean on, the coaching staff that they're just probably making the right choice. And one thing that maybe I disagree with them on is when the defense was not good anyway, what harm is it in having Trey Jackson out there just to try to make a few plays on offense? Because it's not like you're playing lockdown defense with him on the bench.
Yeah, I agree. In a season that was already a bit of a disappointment, what's to lose in getting some young guys some experience, especially a guy like Trey, who I think has a bright future, has a high ceiling, a lot like freshman season Xavier Penson. A guy that has the potential to really put up some nice numbers for you whenever it clicks for him. And if you get him some experience early, that click might come a little sooner rather than later. So I agree with you. I agree with most people that wanted a more playing time for him. It really didn't make sense why he wouldn't get thrown out there a little bit more.
Kind of on the flip side of that, a guy who was more polished and apparently on the defensive end doing the things that Konzo wanted to see was Kobe Brown, because he played a ton and actually started 26 games his freshman season.
Yeah, I would say Kobe brought more to the table than I thought he would. He is polished, but he's not, super athletic. He's not ultra talented. But so sometimes the game can take a little while for those kind of recruits to get used to the speed of the college game and the athleticism that you play against. But and so I definitely thought there could be a learning curve for Kobe, but I was impressed at how quickly he came in and kind of, seems very intelligent and a high basketball IQ. Just kind of knew his role immediately and played hard and brought a lot of unique minutes to the team that that we needed production from that spot.
Yeah, he's listed at 6'7", 240, and I just thought that he played big. Like,
yeah.
I would, for him to be like considered a wing player, I guess, combo forward, there's lots of different ways to classify basketball positions in 2020. I saw him as like a traditional 4. I mean, he played big. He, didn't get pushed around down low. He finished above the rim. He was not a great shooter, so I didn't really want him out on the perimeter that much. And his defensive rebounding, he was the 8th in the SEC in defensive rebounding percentage, and he only played 43% of his available minutes. So maybe small sample size, you could say that would drop a little bit, but he played enough minutes to qualify for the conference ranks, and he was 8th in defensive rebounding percentage. And that's something that when Tillman and Mark Smith are out multiple games, they're a big part of their roles is rebounding, and for him to step up and contribute in that way, I thought was pretty huge.
Yeah, for sure. And this is just the kind of recruit that I think Missouri has to build a program around, is these 4-year guys that they're probably not going to leave early for the NBA, and hopefully you can hold on to them, and they're going to continue to get better over their career. And when they're by the time they're a junior or senior, they're having really productive years. And um, I think that Missouri just has to make its money off of guys like Kobe Brown.
Yeah, I completely agree. Next two guys I'm going to kind of lump in together. They're both sophomores, and those two guys are Torrance Watson and Javon Pickett. Um, Maybe, a lot of people say that the biggest jump you're going to see in a player's ability is from their freshman to their sophomore season. And I don't know, maybe both of these guys are a little bit closer to their ceilings than we wanted to admit last year.
Yeah, and obviously when I was talking about Kobe Brown being the kind of the 4-year player that you want to build a program around, I can't help but think Javon Pickett and Torrance Watson are the kind of players too, but just haven't lived up to the potential that we thought they might be able to do. And it's funny because Javon Pickett um, came in at a higher point his freshman year than I think any of us expected. I mean, and just leveled out. And then Torrance Watson has just kind of been all over the place and hasn't really ever been what we thought he could be. He really showed flashes at the end of last year, but wasn't able to keep that going into this year. So, um, yeah, it's just interesting. Honestly, some of the biggest question marks really out of anybody on this roster has been those two. Obviously, pretty local guys we've been rooting for. At times, I've really loved to see Javon Pickett out there on the floor, and other times I'm like, just get him off the floor, or get somebody else out there, because he just is so athletically limited, and sometimes it feels like he can't do anything. So
Yeah, with Pickett, it's like you're exactly right. I mean, you'll see him just make the perfect play and, you know, understand. Sometimes it seems like he understands his athletic limitations perfectly and will just kind of make the crafty play to get the bucket or whatever he needs to do. But then there's other times where you'll just see him kind of, not elevate well and just get his shot rejected. And it's like, man, what did you think was going to happen there when you just didn't get off the ground and just kind of, put up this layup that it had no chance
right,
of really of going in when you're not elevating and just trying to dunk it, which is maybe not something that very many Mizzou players can do. We talked about Trey Jackson earlier. He is one that can do that. Kobe Brown as well. So maybe just that a little bit of extra athleticism and height would go a long way for Javon. But um, both of these guys could do a better job shooting the three ball.
yeah,
Pickett actually ended the season with a better 3-point shooting percentage than Watson. Watson made 34 threes on the season. 13 of those came in 2 games. The game that I went to, Chicago State, he was 8 of 13, which was the new Mizzou Arena record, I believe. 8 made threes by a single player. And then against West Virginia, he was 5 of 8, and a lot of those came in garbage time because Missouri lost by 23. But he shows at times, his shot looks so pretty,
yeah,
and it's so easy for him to get shots up. And when they go in, it's just, beautiful. But then
yeah.
he'll have back-to-back games where he's like, in a 5-game stretch, he'll be 3 for 21 or something.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're exactly right, and I think that's what makes me fall in love with his potential, is just because his shot, his form is so beautiful, and it just looks like he's such a natural shooter, but it just doesn't go in that often sometimes. And I don't know if we talked about it so much. I don't know if it's a confidence thing. I don't know if he's just not as good as we thought he was going to be. He came from not a pretty lower level of competition in high school.
Yeah,
So
class 3, yeah.
I think he kind of was able to do whatever he wanted in high school, and he scored a lot of his points, in the paint and at the free throw line, and that's been the complete opposite player he's been at Missouri.
Yeah. Yeah, when he does that, everybody's like, "Oh, wow, is that something that he's going to start doing from now on?" And man, it does seem like he's trying at times, but it
Yeah.
just it just hasn't been consistent.
Hmm.
Let's see here. We've talked plenty about Xavier Pinson, but one thing I did want to point out real quick. Let's see here. Um, Pinson in conference play was second in the SEC in possessions used, percentage of possessions used at 31.5. He was also third in the SEC in percentage of shots at 30.6. So when you're in the 30s in arena around 30% in possessions used, that's pretty high. And for him to be second in the conference, um, of course, turnovers factor into that statistic. But I just wanted to point out that um, he was a different player in conference season.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. His usage was ridiculous in conference season for sure.
Let's see here. Mitchell Smith, one of my 3-on-3 team members. He was put into a role in the starting lineup. Let me see how many games he ended up starting for Missouri this year. 13. Um, that's more than Jeremiah Tillman and more than Xavier Pinson. So,
Yeah, Mitchell was. I think that it's easy for the fans to just a casual fan to think that Mitchell Smith didn't have much of a role on the team and he was just kind of an afterthought. But I think if you watched Mizzou basketball a little closer, you probably have an appreciation for him. And maybe some guys find this title a little bit disrespectful or don't really like to be called this. It's kind of like calling a quarterback a game manager. But I really do think that a great description of Mitchell Smith was just kind of a glue guy. And, he kind of did a lot of the little things and um, kind of brought some gritty toughness to the team, played good defense, moved well for his size, and I really think that that role will continue to be there for him next year, too. Just playing tough minutes. And I don't know, he's probably never going to be a volume scorer or volume shooter, but really brought some good minutes at times this season.
I think he had pretty close to the best offensive rating, according to KenPom, of anybody on the Missouri team. He actually shot a better percentage from three than the two guys we just talked about, Torrance Watson and Javon Pickett. He matched Drew Smith's 3-point percentage. And in conference play, he was actually 16th in the SEC at about 37% from three.
How many attempts did he have
38
in the season?
in conference play, 68
Gotcha.
on the season.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely value that he's adding there. Had some really big shots in the Alabama game. I think he was 3 for 3. So
I think one of those got turned into a 2, but
okay, but definitely that's valuable when you can add somewhat reliable 3-point shooting from a guy of his size and someone that can play on the inside too. He definitely brought some versatility to the team.
And also just entertainment value. He got fired up pretty easily and often, and especially after he would take a charge.
Yeah, you'd love to see that for sure. And I'm sure his teammates and coaches do too.
So this next guy, I was really looking forward to maybe, kind of asserting himself as one of the better players in the SEC. And obviously, injury kind of derailed Mark Smith's season a bit, but he still is the player that we think he's capable of being. It's just, trying to get that consistency, and it's mainly because of injuries with him.
Yeah, I still think that his game ended up being just a little bit more one-dimensional than I had hoped to see out of him this year. And again, there's, like you said, injuries and things that happen, but um, I'm not sure that I could ever see Mark Smith being a all-conference type player just because of, it seems like, almost his unwillingness to do anything other than hang around the 3-point line and shoot threes, in which he's very good at, especially in games where the competition's not as good and in garbage time. But I feel like I wanted to see probably more meaningful shots in more meaningful games from Mark Smith than we saw this year.
Yeah, and I don't know if his size is holding him back a little bit as far as, him scoring, driving to the basket, but I don't know, it just seems like he has the athleticism, I think. But actually, even Konzo said, he's not really the type of guy to go up and dunk on somebody.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, he's definitely not a huge guy. He's probably
Yeah.
6'3".
He's listed at 6'5", which is the same as Javon Pickett, and I would not say that those two guys are the same height. So,
Probably not. No.
I still think, we could see big things from him next year. It kind of, I have mixed thoughts every time I talk about, or I think about like player redshirting. He could have redshirted the first season, with Missouri and not played immediately last year. And then, we'd have an extra season out of him. What would be the benefit of that in the long run? I'm not exactly sure, but when a team has kind of a down season and we could have redshirted a guy and we wasted a season of his eligibility, not getting to the NCAA tournament, it always kind of makes me wish that we could have him for another season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it would have been nice if he just committed to Missouri from the get-go out of high school.
That would be cool too.
It would have been, I was really happy when he announced he was transferring to Missouri, and I still am really glad that we got him. I think he's brings something to the table that we've needed the last couple of years, and especially last year, it felt like he shot the ball really well. But I agree that with one more season to go, I think he has the ability to kind of be our knockdown shooter that we can rely on. Just would like to see it happen a little bit more outside of garbage time and against inferior opponents.
Yeah, and not to just drudge this old memory back up every time, but that was supposed to be Jontay Porter's sophomore season, and Mark Smith's sophomore season. So him being declared eligible sounded great when we thought Jontay was going to be playing at full strength, and that would have been a perfect piece to the puzzle. But obviously that's not how it went. Jeremiah Tillman. I wish he would have just been healthy all season, just so we know what that would have looked like. Because it's kind of hard to judge this season for him since he didn't play as much as we expected, and even when he was healthy towards the end of the season, they still limited his minutes quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's hard to judge a season because it was so kind of back and forth.
It's true, and it's been a little bit disappointing to follow him over his Missouri career. Considering I think his best play came in his freshman year. I don't know if that was just because the team around him was probably the best it's been, and he just had, good passers around him, and if he was just confident and carefree. And now that his role has increased and that he's being more heavily relied upon, maybe, I don't know, it makes him nervous or he's thinking about it more. And obviously the fouls too. I mean, that's just been one of the biggest issues of his whole time at Mizzou.
Probably like the most common talking point in Mizzou basketball for the last 3 seasons.
Yeah, literally.
Outside of the name Porter.
Yeah, and but when he came back from injury at the end of the season, I think he got some of those things under control. I think he looked like he was playing a little bit more economically, if you will. I think he was, making smarter decisions, and he wasn't fouling as much. And he kind of, I think against Alabama, he really put up some nice stats and almost quietly felt like he wasn't really there, but he put up some really nice numbers in that last game. So, that's just kind of what you can do when you're as talented as him, is you can help out in so many ways without really even noticing him that much, I think.
Yeah, and I think him kind of anchoring the defense definitely helped in the Alabama game.
Hmm.
You mentioned just like if his play was like almost peaked his freshman year, and I think when you go back and look at the um, highlight videos of Mizzou wins that season, there were plenty of them, and it's really fun to watch those. But the highlights for Tillman, that's he's basically the exact same player that he was at that point in time. I mean, you see
Yeah.
the plays that he's making at that time, and you're like, "Yep, that's the same guy." And the struggles that he had at that time are still present to this day. So,
Yeah, it's kind of the same stuff. I mean, shows flashes with just incredible footwork and how well he can move and how athletic he is, but definitely never really developed much of a shot outside of just dunking everything and putting in layups, which is fine. If that's what he is really good at doing, then I'm perfectly content with him just owning that role. But yeah, you're exactly right. He kind of is the exact same player.
yeah. And maybe he's best off when he's, splitting time at the five with a guy like the guy we're going to talk about right now, Reed Nico. Um, he had his senior day against Alabama, so we talked about him quite a bit there, and we actually broke off that segment and put it up on YouTube if anybody wants to watch that. We talked about him just kind of owning his role at Missouri, basically his entire time there, and not nobody. It was kind of the perfect situation where nobody had basically any expectations for him to be anything more than he was. So when he performed well, it was kind of a surprise, but um, he was just kind of outperforming expectations every time he took the floor.
Yeah, you're exactly right. When expectations aren't super high,
Yeah,
it was easy for him to outperform
yeah,
what we thought he could do pretty much every time, every game.
and he actually saw some starts himself with Tillman being out. If you're keeping track at home, you might notice that I went kind of freshman through senior, but I skipped a guy. I skipped Drew Smith because I wanted to mention him specifically at the end here as, in my opinion, Missouri's most important player this season. And you talk about Tillman being out and Mark Smith being out and how that hurt Missouri. You talk about Xavier Pinson kind of coming into his own and becoming a player we didn't really know that he was capable of. Um, but Drew Smith, kind of quietly, just went about his business and played hurt and made shots, found his open teammates, played excellent defense, was robbed of a all defensive SEC team nomination. But I left him for the end here because, in my opinion, he was the most important player. And um, I think even with the excitement that Pinson brought, Drew Smith is the guy I'm most excited for returning next season.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. He was definitely the MVP of Missouri's season, and I say this definitely with respect and as a compliment, but he was definitely the closest, I think, from what our expectations were for a player to what actually happened. Because we knew we were going to have to rely on him a lot, and he was going to have to come in and lead the team and kind of be the all-around player that he was on defense and offensively. He kind of did it all, and we were kind of expecting him to do that.
Yeah, we talked maybe halfway through the season, a little bit into SEC play when Mizzou was struggling, that we wanted him to take more shots and especially 3-point shots and maybe just be a little bit more aggressive on offense. He's got that, his offense in the paint, his kind of like pump fake pivot foot game that Jordan Geist perfected. I mean,
Hmm.
Drew Smith, he's got it down. I mean,
Oh yeah.
he's got that, that part of his game is perfect. Him pulling the trigger more from deep and just being a little bit more aggressive on offense is something that we wanted, and we did see that a bit more. Um, it was basically he and Xavier Pinson running the show on offense and putting up the majority of the points for several games there in the last quarter of the season. And even though he didn't shoot it as well from three as he did at Evansville, actually a considerable drop off there from his sophomore season in Evansville to this past year. Um, I think maybe that could be a confidence thing. It just seemed like he was maybe a little bit too ready to pass up an open look, and you know, give an opportunity to a teammate. So maybe he gets a little bit more confidence. And Konzo did talk about in a couple interviews just him always being shot ready, and maybe that's something they work on in the off season. But that shoring up that little aspect of his game, I think would just maybe he'll be on people's radar now for those all SEC teams next season.
Yeah, I think he just understood how big his role was at Evansville. Like, if you think that he was the man at Missouri, it was much more so even at Evansville. I remember seeing him play live at Missouri State his sophomore year, and he truly was. He was the guy who was running the show. He took a lot of shots because he knew that I'm the best player in this team. And, he's definitely had better talent around him at Missouri, so maybe he just wanted to get his teammates more involved, knew that his role probably wasn't going to be quite as large as it was at Evansville, but still, with that being said, he was definitely the main contributor, I think. And it's just funny to think, as far as our expectations, what the strengths of this team would be. Probably 3-point shooting, and we thought a weakness would probably be scoring on the inside, and that definitely ended up being flipped. Drew Smith and Xavier Pinson were so good at finishing inside and scoring in the paint and getting in the lane, and I don't think any of us really saw that being a strength of the team.
Yeah, you mentioned his time at Evansville. He also had Ryan Taylor, I think was his name, who was just an absolute knockdown 3-point shooter. And
Yep.
yeah, those two combined were shooting regularly between 12 and 18 3-pointers in a single game, just between those two guys.
Yeah, and I think his teammate ended up transferring to a higher level as well.
I was actually going to look up and see where he ended up, just because I was kind of curious.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
At the time, I actually really wanted him, and I didn't really know much about Drew Smith. I wanted Ryan Taylor for his 3-point shooting, and he actually ended up. He's at Northwestern.
Okay, interesting. How did he do this season, or did he? Was he a grad transfer?
Yes, he was a grad transfer. Yes, so he actually played last season. Not the one that just finished. He played 65% of minutes, offensive rating of only 97, and a drop off in 3-point shooting, 33% on 180 attempts.
Yeah, whenever you when you move up in conferences, you start playing more athletic defenses, and you face more length on the perimeter. So I'm sure it makes it even harder to shoot 3-pointers.
Yeah, and Northwestern was in an incredibly tough Big Ten conference, but they were not that great this year. Finished with only 4 conference wins, but obviously.
What about season before? They made the tournament that year, didn't they? When he was there.
You're talking about
the season he played?
No, that was the 18-19 season, and that was the one they only had
gotcha.
four conference wins. 2017, they were pretty good and made the NCAA tournament as a 8 seed.
Gotcha.
Well, we got that out of the way. I called it most important player, but yeah, MVP of the season for me is Drew Smith.
For sure.
Looking just ahead slightly to next season, do you think that they'll continue to start Drew Smith and Xavier Pinson together?
Yeah, I think so. They really showed some incredible chemistry, I think, at the end of the year. Probably the 2 most important players on the team, at least at this point in time. I really don't see any way they don't both start next year.
I mean, it would be obviously that would be like the common thing that the fans would want is both of those guys back on the court at the same time. You think Tillman's back for his senior year?
I think so. And that's not really based on anything factual, but I think he'll be back for another year. I think that things ended a little disappointingly for him down this year. I think that he'll want to come back and improve on this season for his senior year.
So if Smith and Pinson are starting, do you think they'll try to slide Mark Smith to the 3 or bring him off the bench?
That's a good question. I wouldn't be shocked to see Mark Smith be the 6-man, honestly. Um, I think that I could see a starting lineup being Drew Smith, Xavier Benson, Kobe Brown, maybe Trey Jackson and Jeremiah Tillman. I don't know.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see Smith, Pinson, Pickett, Brown, Tillman, or maybe Mitchell Smith instead of Brown at the 4.
Yeah. Or
There's
maybe they slide Mark Smith in there. I don't know. I wouldn't really be surprised to see any of those combinations.
yeah, maybe not in the starting lineup even necessarily, but I would like to see that lineup at least used at times in games.
Yeah.
With
Kind of go small.
yeah, go small a little bit and just have maybe you would assume an uptick in offensive efficiency while still having an excellent defender on the court in Mark Smith and Drew Smith.
Yeah.
Well, Kyle, I think this went okay. I think we've recapped the season pretty thoroughly here. We didn't have any real technical issues. Drew, what do you think? Drew, did everything go okay in your opinion? I was hoping maybe somebody would be able to bobble his head, but I guess he's out of reach.
Not today.
Oh, okay. Drew maybe fell asleep up there. Sorry, Drew.
Yeah, I think it went pretty well. We'll see how long we actually have to do this, because it probably will be for the next couple of weeks, probably, that we might have to get creative here. But we'll see how well it uploads to all services. But
Yep.
Seems like everything's going pretty well.
Yeah, we may tweak a few things if we can figure anything out to make it a little bit better. But yeah, I think so far so good.
Hopefully everybody is staying safe and healthy out there. I don't know. The listeners, you guys mean a lot to us, so we're happy to have you guys, and got a good community of people for sure. So appreciate everybody that's listening, and
yeah, we were happy to give you that quarantine content.
Yeah.
Most accessible.
We still are the most successful and accessible podcast.
Yeah.
Well, Kyle, you want to tell them where they can find us?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yes, you can find us on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or on Twitter at Mizzou Sports Pod, and you can email us at MissouriSportsPod@gmail.com.
And if you want to see this Skype call, as we are seeing it right now, you can head on over to YouTube, and you can find me on Twitter at C_Albert08. Thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next week.